Request went to you.
It
Okay,
came
great.
up. Yes, we're good. Do you have any opening comments or you're good? All right.
I'm
Well, hello everybody. So I'm excited to be here and I feel like I've known most of you some one way or another. So what we'll do, if I the way I understand the format, we'll have an 8 session on Peter Scholtes' the Leader's Handbook. Um, so what I would like to do, the format would be I'll make some comments and some discussion of my understanding of his work and other people's work that he's relied on, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Um, so throughout the discussion and the next several modules, we'll touch on several of his competencies. And so today we do some introductory discussion. But next week it's on systems and systems thinking. So well, that's still on my mind is we'll cover that's competency one. We'll rely on what Peter had to say and some of the work. I just want to point out Ian wrote a paper several years ago on systems thinking, and it's an excellent paper. And if Ian is willing to share that with everybody for a part of our next week's reading, I have a hard copy of it, but I don't have a digital copy of it. So if you, Ian, share that with me later, and or if you have the uh, email of everybody's, share it with them. It's an excellent paper. Hopefully, you'll take an active role in discussion next week.
Remind me
It's
of the
I
title of
think
it.
it's posted on the Curious Cat website. Uh, no, I could find it, but I thought maybe you have it in your database and you can easily access that.
Yes, that.
I have it here, but it's in hard copy. It's a very good paper.
Well, thank you. Yeah, if you can let me know what the title is of it.
The title of it is um, the title of it is downloaded from the Curious Cat. No, I'm just joking. It is so what system in bracket S thinking. And I think it was a two-part paper, but mine is attached together. Oh, yeah, it's a part one and a part two. That's the first page, if that would jog your memory here.
Oh, okay.
It it's by Ian Bradbury, and you're the only Ian Bradbury I know.
Yeah, me too.
uh,
Let me see if
so
I
if you
can.
find it, if not, I can go on Curious Cat and
Right.
find it. So let me share my PowerPoint, and I've already emailed a copy to you if you like to follow me as I share my thoughts. Okay, so everybody sees that. Oops. All right, so this is module one. Every time I have a chance, I would like to pay tribute to people who have tremendously influenced my thinking. And of course, it started with Dr. Deming, and it was through Dr. Deming that I found my way to Dr. Schuhart and Ackoff, and by extension, Peter. And so there are many people who've done that, have helped me develop over the years, but these four were some of the early ones. So it's really an honor and a privilege to be talking about Peter. Peter and I grew to be close friends and to the end. So he was a great mentor to me and a good friend. Um, So Peter starts the book with giving some history and background, but before that, the Ackoff writes a foreword to the book. It's one of the strongest endorsement of any book I've ever read, especially coming from Russell Ackoff. And I think is worth taking a look at it and really appreciate how much he has to say. I always say if you really want to know what a book is about, read the foreword, who wrote it and what they said. Uh, uh, if you really want to get a brief synopsis, learn something about Schuhart, read the two forewords that Dr. Deming wrote to his two books, the statistical method from the viewpoint of quality, and his original book um, on 1929. One point that Ackoff makes, and he's written a lot about this, uh, that Peter Scholtes is an educator, not a guru. The distinction between educator and a guru, and I think that's a very important distinction. And he talks about a guru is someone who has a following, writes edicts and proclamations, and it transmits his or her ideas uh, without any modifications and expect people to follow. No deviation is acceptable. Uh, but he says an educator, the word educator, really what brings to my mind is Dr. Deming. Anytime I think of an educator, I can think of Dr. Deming. He was truly an educator. Uh, uh, an educator is someone who's interested in teaching and learning and helping people develop and open to new ideas and um, and revision of some of the ideas. So I want to share. I want to stop sharing and my screen and share with you a story I heard from Dr. Deming in one of my early seminars as it relates to this topic of being an educator or a guru. It was one of the early Ohio Quality and Productivity Forum seminars I attended. It must have been, I don't know, 1987, 88. That was OQPF for short, one of the early uh, places for promoting Dr. Deming's ideas. So it was the first year that was held in Cincinnati. It used to be at the amusement park, King Island Park, I think. My first one was there, and then this one must have been the second one was in Cincinnati at the convention center. It was a huge room, big room, packed. And before Dr. Deming speak, the facilitator made some comments that there are 700 people in this room, and we had to turn away 300 people, and went on about all the to glorify the event and what Dr. Deming had to say. So Dr. Deming got to the podium and he said, "I wish I could imitate his voice." Uh, he said, "This little boy was late from school. His mother was so worried. She was worried, and he was late for school. He was late when he got home. And she said, 'Where have you been? I've been so worried.' He said, 'Mom, I heard the horse doctor was in town, and I went to the city town square to see the horse doctor.' I said, 'Well, what did he look like?' He said, 'Mom, he was just a man. He was just a man.'" So Dr. Deming made a point there. I am just a man. I'm not a guru. I'm just a man here. And I think that was one of the fondest my memory of Dr. Deming sharing his story. So, so Ackoff says that this book, talking about Scholtes, the Leader's Handbook, uh, is a distillation and condensation of years of rich experience. And Ackoff is a big promoter of speaking from experience, who has the gift of learning from it. And and this book is about the need to transform the management from the old style, command and control, to the new style, inspiring leadership. And it takes a systemic view of management and focuses on interactions, not just actions. So he actually recommends how to study the book. He says, I recommend you get in a small groups, read the book, and then come back is what you agreed with, what you disagree with, and most importantly, how what you have read would affect your behavior. And that's some of the questions we have at the end of the discussion for our discussion. Excuse me, it's not changing the slides oh, here it is. Something else in that forward that Ackoff mentions, and he writes a lot about that, is the distinctions between growth and development. It says that management should be able to be in the business of helping people to develop. And by that, he means try to do better tomorrow, help them to develop. And makes a distinction that there is a distinction between growth and development. Growth is an increase in size or number, just get larger and larger and larger. Companies and corporations get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what he says, they're not necessarily um, developed. Today with mergers and acquisitions, companies get bigger, global. And you can actually grow without development. And he uses the example of a cemetery. A cemetery can grow, but not necessarily develop. But he says that the development has to do with an increase in a desire and ability to fulfill one's needs and desire and those of others. That it's an increase in our capacity and potentials. And when I think of that, and when I think of Scholtes' competencies, I think competencies are the way of developing, is a part of our development. It has less to do with how much one has than with how much one can do with whatever you have. Okay? Whatever you have. This reminds me of Dr. Deming's discussion early on in one of the seminars, maybe in his writing, about his trips to Japan and what happened in 1950 and with the Japan's capital. Said the Japanese after World War II, they had nothing. They didn't have natural resources. They didn't have an industry. They had two things. They had good management and people. They had good management and people. To me, that's an example of development. Developing not as people, but developing as a nation, developing as an economy. And growth and development are not causally connected. Just because you grow, it doesn't cause development. And then Ackoff says that development, how the development happens is through simultaneous contribution. That of all the organizations, the stakeholder, this is how an organization itself develops. Everybody's involved in that. And management has a responsibility to help people and all the stakeholders to grow. And then, of course, Ackoff believes that the organizations are social systems, that the proper objective of a social system is not growth, but development of its stakeholders as an organization. So it's not just organizational learning, but it's organizational development that everybody, all the stakeholders, um, have a part in learning and developing. So in the preface to the book, Peter shares his experience how in a conference somebody suggested to him that some of the things you talked about really shook my brain. The first time I ever saw a VCR tape of Dr. Deming was sometimes around 1985, 86. I experienced brain shakers. Some of the things he talked in there, I really, perhaps you have the same experience. Some of those things intellectually and inherently I believed in, about people, about work, about quality. But Dr. Deming articulated them. And that was the first time I heard it to be articulated in that way. So these are the brain shakers, and Peter's book is full of brain shakers. And he claims that I'm not conventional. I'm here to shake your brain. Hopefully that leads to learning and development. So I share a few of his brain shakers, and they've been around for a long time. That more than 95% of the problems derive from the system, not from the individuals. People are already doing their best. Everything you're doing to motivate people and all the policies that come with that is hopeless. Create systems that allow excellent work to result from ordinary efforts of ordinary people. People show up for work to do a good job. Create a system. It's the system that prevents them from doing that. As Dr. Deming said, pride of workmanship. It's the system that is an obstacle to the pride of workmanship. So create systems that it allow people to do a good job. It results to good results from ordinary efforts of ordinary people. Changing the system will change what people do. Changing what people do will not change the system. So if you change the system, people improve. Dr. Deming had a nice graph one time showing that if you move the curve to the right, people move with it. 95% of the changes undertaken in organizations have nothing to do with improvement. We'll talk about that later on in his book. The distinction between change and improvement. Sometimes we make changes that make matters worse. And then what happens as the result of this dysfunctionality, that the greatest conceit of managers is that they can motivate people. To challenge that is a brain shaker. Management's patronizing and cynical set of assumptions about people, fallacy of performance appraisals, and so forth. So, and he moves on to say that this book is a modest presentation. Then he covers all the people who really tried, offered brain shakers, and offered new ideas and offered new philosophies, going back to Deming and Schuhart and Ishikawa's and work in Japan and so forth. This book is a modest presentation to the contributions of leadership of Deming and the Ishikawas. Is referring to Ishikawas as father and son. Ishikawas, those who preceded and those who have succeeded them. That this is really it's a great tribute from Peter. That this is really a contribution, a modest contribution to what they have done before us. So I believe this study group is also a modest presentation to the contribution of Peter Scholtes. I think he was a great contributor to promoting Dr. Deming's philosophy. So what was, I think the way Peter Scholtes was taken by Dr. Deming is because of, then again, some of his own, Peter's own inherent philosophies and way of life and humanist view of the world, helping people. If you know his background, he was in helping people business for a long time. And he ties Dr. Deming to the thinking of Pierre de Chardin, an anthropologist, monk, philosopher. And he says that the Chardin says humankind is evolving towards greater consciousness, and that love will lead humans to a new unit and the end state that he calls the omega point. Then what's interesting, Peter ties that, says Deming is doing the same thing. So again, Deming is how Deming's philosophy can help humankind evolve into systems that creates better places to work and learn, better government, better institutions of healthcare, and improve organizational pursuit of every kind. It's about creating a better world for everybody. Deming philosophy represents a means by which people can contribute to the evolution of human spirit. That's really a big kind of thought to say, it takes Dr. Deming's teachings and is outside of some of the limited discussions that I see here and there. It's more than just a slogan, what Deming said, one-liners, and it's kind of a not in-depth approach to what Dr. Deming has to say. Dr. Deming's philosophy, he says, and Peter really believed that, because from where he was coming from, that Deming's philosophy represents a means by which people can contribute to the evolution of the human spirit. It's a lofty proposition, but it's true. And Peter himself was motivated by that. Hence, the essence of the new competencies, which is an interpretation, elaboration, and contribution, and essentially operationalization of Dr. Deming's work, is for that purpose. He operationalized Deming's work as how to do work better, how to create a better world, how to create joy in work, how to create pride of workmanship. And I think that's really what this book is about, and what Scholtes is saying. And that has really, for someone who spent years trying to understand this stuff, my own understanding has evolved. You go from learn enough to do your work, and you learn a few things here and there, and try to learn, but that learning expands. What we're talking about here is about, even when we're talking about qualities, is about creating a better world. How it affects people's lives, how it affects pride of workmanship, how help people to do a better job, essentially how to help people to develop. So this is everybody's responsibility. Learn, contribute, and practice Dr. Deming on all those who preceded us. That's what I got from what Peter is talking about when he says what Deming's philosophy is. The biggest responsibility and obligation we have is how to promote those ideas in a much larger context of creating a better world. So, so the first part of the book starts with the notion of where some of the old philosophy came from. And this is a graph that Peter has in his book. I've used it for many purposes, but I just want to point out something. Some of the discussion we have early in the book and parts of the book and some other places makes a reference to Japan. When you're talking about Dr. Deming and history, and you have to make a reference to Japan. I don't know how those things are now, but it was different then. And I want to hear. I heard something from Dr. Deming from the podium that just because it's Japanese, it doesn't make it right. I just don't want to assume that whatever is Japanese is acceptable. It's not. But this part of the history is very relevant and is very important because of the consequences and the experience and the result of what it produced. And we can be very grateful for that. So this is a timeline of travel, but it applies to many things, communication and computing, but this is about travel. But what we want to focus is in this area at this time with the start of Industrial Revolution and the speed of travel. Something happened here in 1841 that gets our attention. At that time, the railroad was a burgeoning industry. There were cottage businesses and small companies, and people tried to make things happen, mostly single ownerships and trying to. But the railroad was huge. It was a burgeoning industry in travel, in moving materials and moving people, and something happened, and the management became very very difficult for them. How do you manage something this big? And there were many challenges, and in 1841 an accident happens, and that took people's attention, and the management, well, the word management wasn't in play yet. That requires their attention. So what happened as the result of that accident? They tried to come up with a way of managing the railroad and preventing future accidents. And that was the plan for the railroads. The dominant way of looking at things and managing things at the time, and the most experience and the structure, formal structure, was military. And in fact, many of the military from the West Point graduates engineers worked for the railroad. So they hired an engineer by the name of Whistler. I had his full name here, and I'm missing it. Was Major George Whistler. And by the way, he's Whistler's, the painter's father. Whistler's mother, the famous painting. So they hired him, and he had a lot of experience. He was an engineer. He had developed many things in the military. So they hired him to help him with developing a structure. And the only experience they had, either the military and mostly the Prussian military army, and some experience from the church, the Catholic Church, the structure that they were familiar with. So they believed. So this was totally the influence of military structure. But they believed that people were the cause of the accident. So the fundamental premise was, even the terms they used was militaristic. They were trying to find the causes of dereliction of duty. Essentially a militaristic definition of things. The purpose of the organizational chart is to sufficiently specify those duties that management can quickly assign, blame, should another accident happen. And this is what the structure of the origin of the old view, as Peter calls it, the train wreck view of the organization came about. Is we can prevent it by finding faults, by the dereliction of duty. And it is done through a central office run by people called managers. Manager became a new word, a new position. It was distinct functional divisions. It showed a chain of command. Then again, another military definition. It showed a chain of command, clear lines of duty and authority, clear lines of communication and reporting, just like in military. Reporting became very important. And clear lines and description of responsibility for individuals. Now, we can look back on this now with criticism, but this was really a new invention at the time. It's just like we can look at the specification limit with all its limitations, but at the time when it came, it was the only way they knew how to deal with variation and put it in this box. So this is, even though we can look at it with a new view, but at the time that seems to be an improved, that's the best they could do. It was an improved version. They relied on the only thing they knew at the time, trying to solve some of their problems. Of course, that works its way into the general management and corporation as things got more sophisticated and more complex. By the way, this is a slide from Myron Tribus in the Quality First book here. And in one of the seminars, it was in his handout. The basic assumption with this old structure is people at the bottom have no heads. Okay, and that's why this guy is called the head of the organization.
Also, why organizations have all hands meeting. You're supposed to leave your brain at home.
That's right. At 8 o'clock in the morning, park your brain outside and then come in. Yeah.
It's also known as assuming the position down at the bottom of that organization chart. Right?
It's called what? Speak a little louder, Ian.
Assuming the position because you know what's coming.
Oh, yeah.
You're already bent over.
Brian Joner calls it buhika. Bend over, here it comes again. So that worked its way into the modern style of management and became actually college courses and education and management style as we know it today. But that was the origin of it. And something that became was the product of the Industrial Revolution and train wreck of 1841 became a current practices in many organizations, and it's still prevalent, still very prevalent. And then that evolved to the organization as an organism with body parts, this arm of the organization, that arm of that organization, the brain of the corporation, the head of the organization. It's all a reference to the organization as an organism. It became a segmentalist view of the organization, command and control, autonomous functions, does not portray interdependencies and interactions of various functional areas. It emphasizes individual and functional accountability and control. And by extension, for it to be to work and as they say, the structure drives the behavior. For that structure to work, you have to resort to management by results. By the way, one of the earliest papers on management by result was by Peter Scholtes and Brian Joyner, and it is called Management by Results versus Leadership of the Process, I think. MBO, Management by Objectives, performance appraisal, as Peter calls it, all of this became Harvardization of the train wreck management. They became courses, they became seminars, workshops, elegant descriptions. But for it to work, you have to resort to some of these things. Okay? If you believe that the dereliction of duty, later individual accountability, as somebody said, all accountability means who are we going to blame next time? For it to work, that structure to work, you have to have that structure requires certain behavior. It emphasizes individual accountability and control, it destroys teamwork, and there is no reference to customers and products. And it is slow to react to changes and improvement. Many years ago, I was giving a class to a group of shop floor employees. It was actually in paper manufacturing. There were a bunch of line people and production supervisors. And I made that comment, slow to react to changes and improvement. I said, for example, if you give an idea from here, from the bottom, it takes a long time to get to the top. This man raised his hand and he said, "Sir, it never gets to the top. It never gets to the top." So this is what became such an it feels like it's been around for a long time, but it became a structure that came out of the train wreck mentality, and management became such a part of our management system and teaching and training and practices.
I would offer it was around for a long time, especially in the Catholic Church.
In addition to the military, Catholic Church was the other source of the only place to look for experience. It was the Catholic Church. Yeah. So that's where what I call segmentalist view, at least to sub-optimization. In modern day organizations, we divide the organization into all these departments and divisions. By the fact we call them a division, you know what that means. You divide it. And the basic assumption is if you divide the organization into independent parts and then if you optimize the parts, you optimize the whole. And I'll get to this later, that 4 solos does not make a quartet. That's one of my favorite Dr. Deming saying, that optimizing the pieces destroys the effectiveness of the whole. So that's what was going on, and what we actually inherited. That was a part of my education. And many of you probably, before you learn about Dr. Deming. And this is how what you know. And so, but during that time, a lot of other things started going on. During the period that I circled here, there were a lot of other things going on. One was the idea of pragmatism was developing in late 1900s, a quintessentially American way of thought, philosophy. And some of the topics we talk about today on experiential learning, theory of knowledge, operational definitions, has its roots in pragmatism. Sure, Ackoff refers to that the dilemmas were taking place. That is, people, scientists and people could not answer some of those questions, could not, because of the interactions and interdependencies that were going on. Sometimes he calls it Humpty Dumpty dilemma. Things were falling apart and they couldn't put it back together. And that was the beginning of systems and systems thinking. It was during this time when Scholtes and Deming were getting their education, and many of his contemporaries. And Dr. Scholtes developed many of his ideas by reliance not only on mathematical concepts, but on philosophical concepts. And he was heavily influenced by pragmatism. And of course, Dr. Deming wasn't not far after him, and he was educated. Many of the people that, if you go and read some of the people, you hear their names in quality control, statistical quality control early on. They all received their education, early educations in this area. But the two, Scholtes and Deming, were heavily influenced as what was going on in that area. Of course, then we had World War II, and then Japan came, which was a heavily influenced as what we're talking about today. So what happened after World War II? First of all, during World War II, there were considerable influence of Scholtes' work in war efforts, and I'll get to that in a second. And after World War II, the U.S. came on, literally, the whole production capacity was intact. And in an effort to reconstruct construct Europe and Japan, some projects were undertaken. Japan came out totally destroyed, no productive capacity. In order to help the reconstructions, MacArthur asked for some help, and these are people who were at Bell Labs at the time, and they went there to help with technology and radio and so forth. Saracen actually recommended, as they were trying to work on their quality and processes, recommended Dr. Deming. And Dr. Deming's first trip was June 16, 1946. And in 1950, Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, under the leadership of Ikuru Ishikawa, that's Kaoru Ishikawa's father, the Ishikawa diagram, invited 20 leading industries to a meeting, and it is reported that 80% of Japan's capital was present in that room. And Dr. Deming always says they came there because they wanted to learn. And in order to really appreciate what Dr. Deming did during the war and after the war, we know a lot about the Japanese, but he did a lot of work before that. This is a paper by, in 1942, a group of statisticians were formed at Columbia University called Statistical Research Group. And their job was to support the war efforts. Oops, sorry. The war efforts. And they were formed from 1942 to 1945. And this is a paper by an eminent statistician, Wallace. And he reflects on that in a paper later on. And it shows you the contributions of Dr. Deming he had. This was before Japan. He said I just highlighted, if you like, I can send you the paper in its entirety, but I highlighted the areas that is relevant to what we're talking about. He says we got together and we wanted to do some work in the areas of quality, but we didn't know what to do. And some people, and one of them may sound familiar, Holbrook Working and Eugene Grant, those may sound familiar to you, suggested that we need to do something to help the war efforts. And in yellow highlights it says, I wrote on April 17, 1942, to a friend in Washington, W. Edwards Deming of the Census Bureau. He wrote him a letter that says, we need help. How can you help? And this is This is what he wrote. A week later, Dr. Deming writes back with 4 single-space pages on a letterhead of the Chief of Ordnance War Department. That becomes important. Chief of Ordnance War Department. He wrote a letter, but this is what I want to highlight here, that it sounds like Deming just said these things, some of these things late in life. No. He says, after saying this, what did he say? The only useful function of a statistician is to make predictions and thus to provide a basis for action. He was promoting predictions and basis of action many years before that. He suggested what to do, and that was the formation of courses that are well known in the war efforts. And he says, on May 1, I was able, this is Wallace, I was able to write Deming that your letter arrived a few hours ago. The specific suggestions struck home so well that Holbrook Working, chairman of the University Committees on Statistics, has already talked with 2 or 3 of the key people and arranged a general meeting of everyone in statistics. On May 21st, the first letter about the course went to firms supplying to Army ordnance in the Western region, and the first course was given in July 1942. Now, everybody acknowledges that one of the reasons that the quality and the production was so effective during World War II is because the application of Cohort methods. And one of the early people who did that at the time was Captain Leslie Simon. That's why this was on the ordnance paper letterhead. And Simon became a General Simon before that, after that, later. And he published one of the first books on a statistical quality control. And all the military standards, Z, this and that, they have numbers, it starts with a Z. He was behind that. And that's Deming and Cohort were already working with that. What's interesting that what his contributions was there. And Allen concludes in this paper, and I think that's tells us Deming's contribution. The program that resulted from Deming's suggestion eventually made a major contribution to the war effort. Its aftermath, in fact, continues to make major contributions not only to the American economy, but also to the Japanese economy. He wrote this paper in 1980. So Dr. Deming's contribution goes way before what we know as the Japanese miracle. So what did Deming teach the Japanese? That the market is global, the customer is important, quality is determined by managers, production is a system, and then the chain reaction. I don't see or hear a lot about chain reaction. That was one of the things I taught in all my classes. Is in the out of the crisis, the Deming chain reaction. And look at Japan must see itself as a system. One of the most remarkable, I'm trying to move this thing here from the top. Oh, there it goes. One of the most remarkable insight that came out of that 1950 gathering was Deming's view of production as a system. This is really has survived the test of time. It's one of the first time that we can see the interaction and interdependencies and system production as a system or any type of system in a manufacturing or in a production setting. That's immense. It's a remarkable insight that came out in 1950. And of course, that was later extended to the organization viewed as a system, and you can contrast these two. He defined a system as a network of interdependent components that work together for the aim of the system.
I found it interesting that Peter uses a version of production viewed as a system that doesn't include the zeroth stage.
Well, actually, this is production viewed as a system. Dr. Deming added that later when he
Yes,
talked
he
about
did.
organization viewed as a system. Yeah. Peter uses CPAC model, and we'll talk about that next week. He does say this is really a way of operationalizing Deming's production viewed as a system.
Ron Moen was responsible for the addition of stage 0 generation of ideas to the production views of the system. It was in a consulting visit that Deming had with Pontiac Motor Company that Ron Moen was at. Well, Ron brought up that question about, well, what about the kind of innovation, creation of new ideas? Where do they fit in the system? And Dr. Deming drew it in.
Ian, can you tell everybody who Ron Moen was?
Yes, I know.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ron Moen's he's since passed away, kind of like Peter, but he was one of that group of people that were kind of the close to Dr. Deming. Peter and Brian Joyner being on ones, Gypsy and Myron Tribus, that kind of cadre of individuals. Ron was part of a group called Associates in Process Improvement.
Yeah.
Worked a lot together. So that was Lloyd Provost, Ron Moen,
Tom Nolan.
Yeah, Tom Nolan, and trying to remember the guy out in Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah.
mental block for a second.
Many years have gone by since then, but last time I saw Ron Moen was actually at Peter's Memorial here in Madison. And they wrote a nice book on the design of experiment. So,
Ron,
all right. So that's
great.
I'm sorry, somebody.
Kind of the origins of production viewed as a system and kind of all the earlier iterations and kind of how it evolved.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said again.
Ron did quite a bit of research
yes.
on kind of the origins of production viewed as a system. He took trips to Japan and talked to a bunch of people, and so there's kind of the history of how that evolved from kind of the Shewhart cycle as it was described in production view as statistical method from the viewpoint of quality control, and kind of how what he taught the Japanese and kind of how that evolved. Interesting.
I remember reading about that, but I don't remember it was Ron's book, but it was very interesting.
There is a paper that Ron wrote on that.
Maybe that's where I got it.
There is a paper called The Evolution of PDCA Cycle.
Okay.
And it's by associates in process improvements, API. Yeah.
Okay.
And it really refers to a lot of things that Ian was just talking about, and makes a reference actually in there to John Dewey and the experiential learning. John Dewey was one of the original people in pragmatism philosophy. Okay. All right. So how do we I was hoping by now I'd leave time for discussion. We still have time, but I want to go a little faster. So how do we, Peter suggests, how do we make that transition from the old philosophy to the new philosophy? And he offers two learning curves. One of them is called the conventional. That what happens in the conventional, we have a slight time. We learn things. We know. We read a book. We get exposed to some terminologies. Common cause, a special cause. We say PDCA. We say, learn a few things, and then there is a we make some changes, we make a rapid improvement, and then it flattens out. Okay? Because the learning is not substantive, is not in depth. It's, for lack of a better word, is really superficial. And then he offers a different curve. That's what happens, which is transformative. That we learn something, but we get to a point when we recognize that we have an aha moment. We don't really know that much. And I can share with you my own experience. I mean, I started reading. I had 4 or 5 books open at the same time. Read this, read that, and just all sorts of stuff. Be on the phone with people again. Download this paper. Well, it wasn't download then, but find this paper, and so then you realize that there is really a difference between reading and doing. So the reading needs to be more in depth, and that's when you realize you have an aha moment, and that's where the real learning begins and improvement takes place. Now, Deming addressed that early in his Out of the Crisis in a different context, but it essentially talks to this about the same thing, is that when we learn, we start working, improving quality, we find some special causes and we remove. I hate this term, but people used to say this all the time, low-hanging fruits. I just wanted to scream. These are all low-hanging fruits. So it says we get busy and we remove some of the special causes in the process, and we have some improvements, and then things stabilize, and then he calls it a typical path of frustration, wishful thinking, that because we did grabbed a few low-hanging fruits or remove some special causes, then we're good, and that leads to frustration. Now, Brian Joyner has the same concept of, and in his fourth generation management. I really like that. He calls it eyelash learning versus rapid learning. I made a small modification to it. That we learn something is not substantial and then bang, flattens out. This is what he calls eyelash learning. There is no building of knowledge, no building of learning. There is no organizational learning. The same mistakes happen all the time. Somebody leaves the job and they take all the knowledge. There is nothing left behind. And he calls this the eyelash learning. But the rapid learning, it builds on each other with a small, learning curve. It would be the same thing as this. So I just added these things happen when we learn how to learn, and that is through application of PDSA cycle, as that we face a challenge and we want to make improvements and we want to learn, and is with a little slow change here, we build on that, and that's how what happens. And I think this is probably, if I had to modify Peter's curve, it would be this, that these build on the top of each other. They don't flatten out necessarily, but they build on the top of each other. And that is somebody has something in the chat, but I can't get there right now because of the way the full screen is. Okay.
Dennis was just saying he had to leave. That's all.
Oh, okay. All right. So also Deming mentioned that again. I think Ian may be pointing to this, that he refers to Schuhart's, that the linear learning or pipeline learning versus cyclical learning, that you design it, you make it. In the statistical method from the viewpoint of quality, Schuhart has an excellent, that's in chapter 1, excellent covers that. And then you go to the end and you fall off. He says that you have to close the loop. And this is one of my favorite drawings of Dr. Deming. He calls it the helix. Is the cycle of continuous improvement, that you continue improving and you move on. So I just want to close with what how does transformation take place? How do you go? Uh, and this is called the competency matrix. I remember in a conference one time, Myron Tribus talked about that, but it didn't register until some years later. Then I saw it from Peter, and then I looked at it. How does learning take place? How we move from this state to a more evolved state? And in my discussion with people, sometimes these words really don't have a pejorative connotation here. Incompetence doesn't mean bad. It just means lack of knowing, lack of ability. Unconscious doesn't mean ignorant or anything. Especially today in all the discussion of consciousness, that's not in that context. It means you're not aware of it. You don't know. So the first stage is, and I've been in this position many times, is unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. That's for many years, many generations, people thought the earth was flat. They didn't know what you don't know. They still had families, and they planted, they farmed, they did this and that, but you don't know what you don't know. You move to the next stage of the conscious incompetence. That is, at least you acknowledge you don't know. Boy, other people are doing better. We don't know what to do. There is an acknowledgement of that. And from there, you move to the third stage of the conscious competence, is that you do it knowingly, but you have to have directions, you have to have standards, you have to be reminded to do it right. All of these are improvement in the stages. And then you get to the fourth stage, which is unconscious competence. You do it because you don't know any other way. You do the right. I remember this line from Tribus. You do it the right way because you don't know the wrong way. I remember that line. Okay, and it's inherent. It's just the way it happens. It happens inherently, and that's I think this happens. It happens to me often, and it's not. There is no shame to it. It's just you don't know what you don't know. Um, I didn't know a cell phone before there was a cell phone. But if you go in this cyclical relationship, I think that's the process of the transformation. It's not a one time. It's just a continuous process. But there is this is a line by Tribus, and in the germ theory of management about how people dealt with diseases at the time. He says they didn't know, they were ignorant. It doesn't mean it's not a pejorative accusation. It's just that you don't know, you're ignorant. That's the true meaning of the word, lack of knowing. He says there is an excuse for ignorance, but there is no way to avoid the consequences. Right? And a lot of companies that go out of business because of lack of planning, lack of vision, lack of leadership, lack of they're not competitive anymore. There is ignorance there, but I mean, you may not. There is no excuse for that. There is an excuse for we didn't know, but you can't avoid the expenses, the cost that is associated with that. So what happens to go through that process? Peter says, be patient. Look back, progress takes time. Be persistent. He always signed up his books. If you ask him to autograph it, he would sign it up with be persistent. It says, this is great stuff and a lot of fun, period. Be persistent, exclamation mark. And he always said that. Don't give up. Don't be restless. Avoid management philosophies du jour. Be humble, acknowledge inadequacies. We don't know. And go back to competency metrics. And be inelegant. This may be messy, make mistakes. You say silly things, as I have in meetings, and especially when I knew I thought I knew everything because I knew a few terms and the alphabet soup, SPC, ASQ, this, DMIC, or whatever a lot of these groups use. Six Sigma, black belt is. So the competencies are this, and we'll get back to them and more later. And I wanted to share this with you because I have a tendency to think of a system of profound knowledge as four legs, and I've been promoting that, and I show a picture with four legs on it, but that's really not a true. If it's a system, there are not all these legs are connected.
Yep.
It's a system. They're all connected. And Peter talks about that in Competency 5. And he uses this picture that I found it very, very descriptive of what that is. You see, this is not four separate legs of a stool. They're all connected. One affects other. How can you talk about performance appraisal without talking about the system or variation or motivation? They're all connected. And this is an important point to me. Now, I was going to talk about my competency matrix, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop and I will move into discussion period. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Let me just share at least the questions. You jump in and share your experience and the three, what you agree with Peter's reading, what you disagree, and how you practice some of these. And I also pose some questions. We may not have time to get to all of them, but at least we get to some of them for a productive discussion. All right. So I'm following Ackoff's suggestions as how to conduct a discussion is what they agree with, what they disagree with, and most important, how what you have read will affect your behavior. I also added some, see how you apply the learning curves. That is the conventional and transformative curves. How you let me allow somebody in. How you the competency metrics. I just shared mine about how I have go through different processes. So, and the rest of them are. I took some of these questions from Peter's end of the chapter exercises. So just jump in and share your experience and your insights with the group. Do I need to leave these questions on, or you have them?
You could probably leave them on.
Okay. All right. So we're open to discussion and just whatever is on your mind.
What I have found interesting is
Since I can't see everybody, I imagine others can't see you either. Just say who you are and where you are, and we can put names with voices.
I'm Tim Higgins, and right now I'm at what used to be Rocketdyne.
Oh, you are on the screen, Tim. But it says
As
Monica.
now.
But it says Monica and Bill.
Oh, I know them, but
Tim-
I'm not them.
Tim was having technical challenges with fixing that, and we haven't been able to figure out how to fix it.
All right. All right, go ahead, Tim.
The thing that I found fascinating, and I know Michael Feige talked about it, and one of my favorite physicists talks about it. Learning what you look at when you apply these things and you learn from them what you find out is how much you didn't know. And so you're facing it, as Feynman put it, an ever increasing frontier of ignorance. Because the more you learn, the more you figure out there is to learn. And Michael Feide talked about that. You'll get something, you'll be working on it. You've climbed the mountain. You think you're quote there, and you celebrate that, and you take a big breath, and then your light bulb goes on that now that you're there, you can see a whole bunch of things that need doing that you didn't see when you got started. It's very intriguing how it snowballs, because as you learn, you become aware of things that weren't even part of your consciousness to go say, I got to learn those things. And if you look at the old competencies and compare them to the new ones, you can see how the world's going to be a better place if we're using the new ones.
Tim, this is Mike. I was thinking, I wouldn't say the opposite, but when I looked at the brain shakers, I remember the when I first started hearing some of those, I realized I sort of innately knew them. So there's two ways of looking at this, right? I've had the luxury of over time look back and said somehow I learned some of these things and started applying them in my roles. And so I was kind of happy to say, even though I didn't have direct exposure to some of them, that actually did know some of this stuff, right? So you meet when you do training and education, meeting people where they're at is critical. And I always found that I assume going into a lot of these things, I kind of know some of this stuff. There's a big gap of things that I don't know. And to your point, Bill or Tim, over time you find out that you know less and less. But I think sometimes we realize that we actually do know some of this stuff and have been doing it, which is kind of refreshing.
Fazel, this is Ian. I was thinking about your competency matrix and so you start off in the I don't know what I don't know
Oh,
corner, right? So you're just ignorant, and then you become conscious of what you don't know. So you're aware that there's a bunch of stuff that you don't know. You learn about some of those things, so that gets you into conscious competence. And then I can see where deliberate practice of conscious competence would allow for skills to become more autonomic, right? So they're non-conscious. What I'm kind of stuck on a little bit is thinking about kind of the learning cycle, and in the learning cycle we're continuing to make predictions based upon our current theory, and then take actions such that we can test those predictions against experience. And so that keeps things in that conscious competence area where learning and improvements continuing to happen without necessarily kind of going into that corner 4, right? So I'm trying to reconcile the learning models in my head, and then
right.
they're not coming together for me right now.
That's a good point, Ian, and I struggle with that too. One way I finally, at least I understood it to me, is let's just look at customer service or ethical behavior or whatever. In this quadrant, when you're consciously competent, um, we remind each other, or the organization reminds to act ethically, and customer service is important, and things of that nature. An evolution of that would be in this area that customers, you do the right thing, your customer service comes naturally. Nobody has to remind you. Ethical behavior is naturally. Nobody has to say, hey, you need to act ethically in that. You remember this, that. So I have struggled with that as well. But the idea of of doing the right thing because you don't know any other way. I have tried to reconcile that uh, um, in that way. Okay, Ben has his hand raised, and I'll have another comment about that, and I'll share it with you in a second. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, right. The problem I think is that it feels like what you're experiencing is similar to what I experienced. It's you get to that unconscious competence thing, but you've already moved on to back to one. And so you're right, you're building atop, right? You're building atop of all these layers. And so you never feel like you're getting completely through this. And you never sit in that unconscious competence phase for the whatever thing is still in your mind. You're just doing a bunch of things that you don't think about anymore, and you're building on top of it.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it.
One experience Ian and I have with this is for many years I taught at a liberal arts school that was sponsored by the Dominican sisters, and the school principles was truth, justice, compassion, partnership, um, and um, and sometimes I observe in the sisters um, certain behavior and action and things coming out of their mouth that I always thought, do they think about saying those things? Or does it come naturally? It appeared it comes naturally. And I don't know, do they get up you get up every morning and say, I'm going to be compassionate today. I'm going to practice justice today. I'm going to practice truth today. I don't know, but the way they acted and they behaved, it came so naturally, and it always reminded me of this quadrant. Uh, and and that's what I have tried to reconcile in my mind. Yes, we can do a lot of practice and do a lot of things and eventually move it to that in that quadrant. But when I think of the unconscious competence, it is something I'm not there in, uh, personally or professionally, but uh, it is um, it is you get to a stage of doing the right thing because that's the only thing you know. So I don't know. I don't know.
I guess one of the questions I would have in that situation is the operating mental model that people are fundamentally bad, and you have to cajole them into and incent them into being good, or that people are fundamentally good, and that if you're observing bad behavior, it's probably because there are incentives or systems that are producing that.
It could be.
As a generic rule, not that that's, explains every case. And um, certain belief systems seem to be based more on a premise of kind of you're bad and you're kind of traveling a torturous path to becoming acceptably good.
Dennis, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the production viewed as a system diagram.
Okay.
Some time ago, a person in a learning session commented that it had very little to do with service. And I've since had the opportunity to think about what would be the labels. And basically, this is aligned very much like the SIPOC diagram that is in this first or second chapter. But the idea that Deming articulated in 1950 can be modified to apply to service viewed as a system. And I think that's the one thing that I walked away from reviewing this part of the book again. Thank you.
Good. Isn't there a chapter in Out of the Crisis on Quality in Service? I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think. Well, remember, some of these things where we can talk about them elegantly now because we know a lot more, but you have to think
Yeah.
where they originated. I mean, he was talking to Japanese manufacturers. So, but then he evolved, he developed the organization viewed as a system and a lot of other things later. Um,
So I've got another comment on the conscious competence, unconscious competence.
yeah,
I'm thinking about many people grew up in the train wreck chart world, and they have learned from an early age that if they speak out of turn, they might get slapped down. They might have a good idea. They might know more than they share because they're worried about taking the risk of speaking up and sharing something. And I'm not sure where that fits on that model, but that's
yeah.
another factor that influences a lot of people.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I think
Oh, yeah.
I think Dr. Deming recognizes that in his chapter on profound knowledge in the new economics. He talks about the ability to help people pull away from what they were doing in the past and not feel guilty about it. If
Oh
you've
my
been
God.
doing
I mean,
something for a long time and find out that it was the wrong thing to be doing, it's really very hard just to give it up. I have to admit that I've been doing the wrong thing all these years, and that can lead to not trying the new thing. And we have to be conscious of that and do what we can to help.
yeah, I was so steeped in the not like raising your hand or speaking out thing. And when we transitioned from working in a university to taking our project to through a DARPA contract and out into the like commercial space, I was still very quiet about things, and it did damage to the organization that I worked for. And I didn't understand that until I'd like left. And when I left, I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Now I'm just like, if I'm not saying things that might get me fired, I am doing my job incorrectly. So,
So one thing I just want to make a comment of this competency matrix is used a lot in the training field, and it's not designed as a judge of character, more about the state of being, and I think that's the distinction is. As an example, either in my own case or I've worked with people. I worked with a production manager that used to say, um, the best employees are hungry employees. And he acted and behaved in that way. Or he would say, if I put the fear of God in everybody Monday morning, it will go smooth all week. Now, now I can reflect on that and say, um, and make a character judgment versus not put him in he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Unconscious incompetence. It's not. Uh, uh, but that same person was a pet loving and uh, feed homeless and this and that. But that was his view of the work, and I and this is really not a judge of a character. It's a state of knowing, and that's what, and I think that's where this is the context we need to look at it.
Fazel,
And certainly,
your comment then that this is used a lot in a training context kind of lit a light bulb for me there, because it's like you have a class of people who don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Knowledge is coming from the outside.
Yeah.
You make them aware of what they don't know. You teach them the knowledge necessary so they do
Yes.
know it, and
Yeah.
then you practice skills to the point where they become competent in it. And it's not then a learning cycle in a PDSA sense. It's
Yeah.
it's more like a PDCA controlled feedback
Yeah.
loop,
Yeah.
right? Where that knowledge is coming from the outside and driving that
Yeah.
cycle. And then the
Yeah, that's a
cycle
better
Yeah,
itself
because
context
is
to look at.
creating knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
That to me makes more sense.
Yeah.
depending on the discipline, you're likely to find yourself in very different boxes. And so
Yeah.
I think it's sort of subject matter. It's tied to subject matter or discipline or knowledge in a certain area.
Hello, Fazel. This is Dirk Van Putten calling in
Oh,
from
okay.
Michigan.
Go ahead.
Just for me, the idea of unconscious competence, box four, never sat well with me. And I always wondered about subconscious competence as opposed to unconscious competence. To me, unconscious means there's the cognitive functioning is completely disconnected. And to me, unconscious competence is more really subconscious or spontaneous. It's not deliberate, it's natural. And unconscious incompetence, box one, that sits okay with me. For some reason, when I've been around this structure, this model, the unconscious competence never really sat well with me. And I always wondered about subconscious or some other term.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, Dirk. Yesterday, I had the very conversation. That's why I tried to qualify it early on that this is not in the context of um, consciousness and subconscious discussion that's going on right now. When this was developed and is discussed here, when we talk about unconscious, is essentially lack of knowing, unawareness.
Yeah, it's
So
awareness and unawareness.
so it's not in terms of um, unconscious consciousness, because I study that stuff too, but but it's not in that context. Had had they used it, like I said, in the context they developed it at the time, that's what the meaning is. Now there is a lot of this discussion of consciousness now that we have to be aware of. Everything comes from consciousness. It's not that when we say unconscious, it's not. It just simply means lack of awareness, and like I said, lack of awareness of the Earth is flat. It's not. It's not a fault or a character defect or um, anything like that. It's just lack of awareness. You don't know, and that's essentially what that means.
I was
Now,
thinking, I was
you
thinking,
can
oh,
develop
sorry,
that,
Fazel.
Dirk. You can develop that and put it in that framework. I mean, this is not etched in stone. Uh, this is just came from the book.
Thank you.
You can develop that on using actually
Aware and unaware or something of that nature.
or
Yeah.
consciousness in the term you understand it, and say,
Yeah.
oh, this really is a better or an improved way of saying what the metric is trying to say.
Thank you very much.
Sure. One more, and then I think our time is up. Let me see. Go ahead. Who was next? Was going? Mike, was that you?
Yeah, I was just mentioning that I think if I look at this in terms of like an organization, I think culture, and if culture is unwritten ground rules or the way we do things around here, you can go into an organization, and I think it's similar to what you were saying about the nuns that worked in the school, that there's a way people behave in an organization, and I think they're at that unconscious competence level. And when you come in brand new to that organization, you're looking around, you're not understanding, you're trying to figure out how you're going to fit in, right? And you start to learn that, oh, I need to do it this way versus that way. And you kind of go around one through four. And I think you get to an organization, and to your point, you can have a bad uh, culture, or you can have a good culture. And if you're leaning towards the good culture, right, the people that are in that culture and have been there for a number of years, I think a lot of those behaviors are in that box four. That they are, it's just the way you behave when you're in the work environment, and it's reinforced by the entire organization itself.
So just in closing on this topic is that Peter says in his book that um, Myron Trivers learned that from a Mike Vance who was at Disney World and training and education, and Trivers taught it to Deming. So it essentially is really rooted in a lot of the training um, disciplines. So if you really do some search, you can see that that's a lot of it is. But that's a good example of us, is that, you know, we have different perspective on something, and uh, uh, like Ackoff says, you can cut an orange horizontally and it's one view, you cut it vertically is another view, but it's the same orange. So so what perhaps inherently we're talking about the same thing, but it's communicated differently. So this is all I have, Bill, right now. Just a reminder, next week we'll talk about competency 1 and systems thinking, and introduce the CPOC model. And the first element of the CPOC model, you go from right to left, is purpose, and we'll discuss purpose. And also, either Ian or I will look for a paper that he wrote on systems thinking, and I find it very good paper, and it's along the lines of what we'll talk next week, and perhaps he can share some of his thoughts on that. So this is all for today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very much.
So somebody put something in the chat. Is that something that we all need to?
Oh, that's someone was thinking, that's the link to the paper.
Okay,
I
thanks.
went and found it already.
Oh, okay.
I think I found the paper or two papers,
Oh,
but
is this
they're
only
not
the first
open.
part?
The last time they were opened was in 1996, so I'm
Okay.
gonna have to update the
That was
version of
that was
of
me.
Word for them.
Yeah, that was me downloaded it.
So
Okay. Is there
constantly
everybody
reading,
is Bill
see if I
Hunt,
learn
not
anything
Bill.
in between.
Bill was his father. What's his name? John Hunter's website, Curious Cat.
Yeah.
Management website. He has a lot of stuff on there. I
Yeah.
haven't been on there in a long time, but
Yep.
we'll talk about his dad in July conference. Was a friend of Peter's, Bill Hunter. Hunter and Box is the design of experiment book, and one of the hunters is Bill Hunter. Okay, so everybody has. I'll also, next time I email the group, I'll send it as an attachment. I think I had it open here. But oh, no, Ian, why don't you do that? Since you found it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, just convert them and I'll send them out.
There is a part 1 and a part 2.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm assuming the files that call system 1, system 2 are probably what that is. So I'll send them. I'll either send them out or I'll send them to you and Bill Fazel, and for you to forward on once I get them converted.
Okay, and then I'll put it in my folder of the study group.
Thank you, Fazel.
All right, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank
See you
you.
next week.
Take care.
Ciao.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You need me to stay behind, Bill, for anything?
Let me call you, and then we'll let me call you, and I'll give you instructions on how to start Zoom.
Okay.